All right, everybody. Thank you so much for taking a couple of minutes to spend the afternoon with us. We've convened a group of experts that are going to speak a bit about some of our reactions to the announcements that AWS made at their reInvent conference a few weeks ago that we were fortunate enough to attend. I'll do a quick round of introductions. I have Jeff Spear, Ironside's practice director for data engineering. I have Dee Shea, Ironside's practice director for business intelligence, and Brian Platt, our practice director for machine learning and AI. And my name is Tim Pratek. I am the founder and CEO of Ironside, and really excited to spend a few minutes chatting about our perspectives here. From an agenda perspective, we're going to give you a few minute overview of who Ironside is and what we do and why we're here talking to you about this. We'll hit on some key messages, that we interpreted. Obviously, a conference like reInvent has very significant attendance, and there are many different aspects that are evolving very quickly. We are going to focus on the data and analytics aspects of the AWS announcements. And then each of the practice leads, which I've just introduced, will hit on specific capabilities as it relates to data engineering, AI machine learning, as well as business intelligence. And then lastly, we'll have an opportunity to, hit on questions that any of the folks attending have about either the specific features and functions that have been released, as well as, sort of other questions, generally speaking, as it relates to data and analytics on AWS. From an Ironside perspective, we are a cloud data and analytics firm. We've been working to help large and small organizations leverage data as an asset for over 20 years. The tools and technologies have evolved over that time frame, but the concepts of organizing data, making it available, delivering it to affect business outcomes are the tenets which we've operated for that time frame. Strategy, business intelligence, data and data engineering and information management, advanced analytics, BI, AI, managed services that go across that. And then in the areas of management, advising, design, build, deploy, and govern, right? So at the end of the day, as you contemplate a move to a modern architecture on the cloud, as you think about migration from existing implementations of legacy technologies, we have significant experience in helping organizations make that jump, and would love to talk to you about our points of view related to all aspects of that. Obviously, there are cost benefits, there are optimization benefits. There are a lot of reasons why you would consider and think about a move to a cloud-based architecture. And we'll talk over the course of the next few minutes about different aspects related to the AWS platform and specifics in the three areas that we've just mentioned. So some key messages that I took away, and again, I was fortunate enough to attend in person, and looking at, I was able to attend in 2021 as well. I think there were something like 35 to 40,000 people in certainly a COVID-affected year from a conference perspective. This year, I think the numbers were close to twice that. I've heard 65 to as much as 80,000 people. So obviously, lots of interest, lots of energy, lots of excitement, both over, being in person with folks, after a few years of just sitting behind a screen. And then also with the advances and with the increasing capability and flexibility and really the optimization that comes from moving and having things on sort of a single flexible architecture. The number from a revenue perspective, I think, is somewhere around 80 billion. That's a business, AWS as a whole, that's growing pretty significantly year over year, somewhere in the 30 to 40% range, with this massive growth, right? And it sort of speaks to the innovation, the capability, as well as the adoption that's happening within both our customers and in the market as a whole. As we sort of drill down on that and think about data, much of sort of the first generation of a move to the cloud was related to reducing data centers, moving things from on-prem to the cloud, separating compute and storage. And as we think about sort of a second generation of applications and content and essentially re-engineering, we're seeing many of our customers both desire to and complete shift to a modern data strategy, which provides more flexibility, easier and more sort of distributed access to data where it makes sense. So really just thinking about how to modernize and move data assets and make them more democratized throughout the organization, and then sort of the tooling aspects on the front end of that. So we see many customers along this maturity curve and journey. We also see AWS playing a big role in that for our customers. And the native AWS services, which is where we're going to focus our conversation today, around data analytics and AI, really strong advancements, and really pleased with what we're seeing and excited about that. When we think about data integration, obviously there are many different services on the AWS platform, and we're seeing heavy investment from AWS in the tooling to move data around with Data Brew and Glue. We're seeing a lot more integration natively between the different services, easier to deploy, easier to deliver to end users to affect outcomes. And again, from our standpoint, we really focus on analytics to affect the business, not just sort of infrastructure. And then, obviously moving data around, combining data together, both on the platform as well as from a logical and a business perspective within your organization. One of the stats that sort of was delivered in the keynote was that 94% of AWS customers use 10 plus of its database and analytics services. And I think the point to take away from that is that there's no one size fits all, right? There are so many different capabilities, but there are so many different needs, right? Building patterns of AWS services integrated together, as well as leveraging technologies that sort of layer on and sit on top of AWS. Most enterprise class customers are using many of those different pieces to accomplish, the outcomes and move their maturity down the path. The other thing that I'll mention is that AWS's QuickSight technology, significant increases in functionality, and Dee will speak to this a little bit in a minute, but really excited about, the paginated reporting, as well as some of the automation components, right? Thinking about how to deal with BI ops, how to deal with migrations and moving from legacy platforms onto the cloud. Really excited about some of those capabilities. So with that being said, I will hand it over to Jeff Spear.
Thanks, Tim. So as Tim said, I run the data engineering practice at Ironside, and that sort of covers a wide variety of capabilities around moving and restructuring data. And we sort of like to talk about that in terms of something we call our modern analytics framework. And so I wanted to talk about that a little bit because it will serve as a good frame for a lot of the specifics that we see coming out of reInvent. The modern analytics framework is a way of organizing your data, your insight generation, and your automation of data integration in such a way that you really optimize and maximize your ability to create insights. And that starts sort of at the top of this diagram, where you have people who are generating reports, generating insights. And something that happens a lot now is that those people will make a report. Often they'll use a tool, like Excel or Cognos or Power BI. But in making that report, they do a lot of transformations, and they'll often do that within that tool or within a tool that they have control over. And so they create an insight, and that insight is useful, but then as it goes and becomes more used and it evolves over time, they're stuck doing those transformations, maybe manual refreshes or maybe manipulations in a tool like Excel or Power BI. And those manipulations can get more complex over time, and they will change as business needs change. And all of a sudden, those people who are supposed to be generating insights are spending too much of their time automating insights that they've already done. So one of the things that we try to do is remove that process of updating and refreshing and transforming data from those people, except when they're doing it in pursuit of a new insight. There's always some amount of work they're going to do, but then once that's done and that insight is created, you want them to move on to the next insight, not continue to update the current one. So in order to do that, we split off that functionality into the bottom of this chart, which is automated value delivery. And so the idea there is you have a separate set of people, and their job is to take those transformations, take those things that have proven business value, and automate them. And usually, you have people in IT who do that. The problem often is they're not necessarily working on the highest priority things. So there's a lot of governance and coordination necessary so that when someone generates a new insight and that insight is prioritized as having high value, the faster that data and those transformations are automated, the faster those knowledge workers can move on to the next insight, and the faster that data becomes available to more people who might be able to leverage it into even more and deeper insight. So you have those two sets of people, and then in the middle, you have what we call data as a service. And the idea is that the value of the data is automated. It's then provided to people at various levels of refinement so that they can generate their insights. And those levels of refinement are shown on the right. So it used to be that the data warehouse was the go-to place and everything was supposed to be there. And that's great for knowledge workers because the data warehouse is very well structured, very well refined. It's very easy to find what you want. The problem is that it's a lot of work to get it there, right? It takes a lot of understanding and design and analysis and development to create a data warehouse and to update it. And a lot of organizations have sort of gotten stuck in that loop because they have a data warehouse, but updating it takes so long that people inevitably fall behind, and the data warehouse gets out of date because you can't keep it updated fast enough. So at the other end, you have a more recent development of data lakes, and these are very popular in AWS because AWS makes it very simple to use S3 or other storage mechanisms to centralize your data. And the idea of a data lake is the opposite. It's very easy to get data into the data lake. So with very little overhead, you can centralize all your data. The challenge is that the data is in native formats. It's raw. It hasn't been cleansed. It hasn't been refined. It hasn't been integrated. So it can be very hard for people doing reporting and doing analytics to get anything out of that data because they have to go in and do all that work themselves. So a data lake is useful because it gets data in. A data warehouse is useful because it gives you, sort of centralized, refined, easy to access data. And so what you want to do is find the right level of balance between how much data is in your lake and how much data is in your warehouse. And that, again, requires sort of prioritizing what information is important, what insights are important, so that the extreme amount of work that goes into a warehouse only gets done on information that is important. And of course, that's going to change over time as new information comes in or new insights come in. But if you've minimized the size and breadth of your warehouse, you are able to focus on new things that are super important and getting them to where people need to have them. And so in between those two, what we found is there are two types of intermediate, what we call data zones, where you have data that might be more refined than a data lake, but not as refined as a data warehouse. And so the first of those is what we call just sort of general data zones, which are, again, automated areas where, it might be for certain people doing some amount of work on the data helps them and just keeps them from repeating that work over and over again. And so you can have a little bit of development, and that produces, a lot of value for people using that data. So it might be, if you have, multiple ordering systems, it might be that aligning that data and putting it in one table helps anyone who wants to do reports on orders. Or maybe there are some data cleansing and data quality steps that you can do that, again, you do that once and then no one else has to worry about it. And you don't have to go all the way to turning it into a dimensional data warehouse, but that level of refinement will help people leverage the data. People using tools like QuickSight or Tableau or Power BI might want the data in a more simple, just like give me one big table. Tool like Tableau likes that kind of format. And so again, creating a data zone where certain data is put in that format, that's much easier to do than creating a data warehouse, but again, has a lot of value. And the other type of data zone is a sandbox. This is something where you give people the ability to transform and create new data sources with stuff that exists. And again, this helps them with insight generation. It gives a centralized place where this kind of stuff can happen. So it's not happening in Excel and Access and on people's desktops where it's very hard to see and understand and distribute. You put it somewhere centralized like AWS, where the results of that can be sort of seen and used by everybody. The idea of a sandbox is that it's temporary and experimental. So people use it for insight generation, and sometimes it's just for a one-off and they do it and they create some stuff and that's that. If it turns out that that has value, you want to move the stuff out of those sandboxes into another data zone. And again, this is where automated value delivery comes into play, sort of prioritizing those results and making sure that they get automated in a way that helps everyone in the organization. This kind of process is really well suited to the cloud and AWS because you can spin up a sandbox for as long as you need it. If you're done with your results, you can shut it down or you can transfer it. The flexibility and scalability that the cloud gives you really helps a lot in creating this kind of environment. And so the overall goal here is to just have a lot of sort of smaller moving parts, and then sort of effective governance and prioritization that makes sure that when someone creates something valuable, that is focused on and put in the right place and made available to everyone else in the organization. And a lot of the developments that AWS announced at and around reInvent have really helped move in that direction. So if we go to the next slide, these are some of the high-level things that I'm going to talk about in detail, but really AWS is sort of focusing and innovating in all of these areas. So QuickSight, which Tim talked about and Dee's going to talk about more, there's a lot of innovation that's going to help with insight generation. Spark for Athena, which I'll talk about in a sec, is another way that people can manipulate data in new ways within AWS. And Brian's going to talk about the machine learning data science side of things, which obviously is another way of generating important rapid insights. AWS has some new and interesting stuff in how you present, discover, and explore data in Data Zone, which we'll talk about, as well as the existing Glue data catalog. And then at the automated value delivery side, they are continuing to innovate with Glue, which is sort of their main ETL service, Redshift, which is a great place for storing analytic data, and then AppFlow, which is a newer service for connecting to mostly SaaS services and making it much easier to bring that data into your data lake and data environment. So again, when you're thinking about these things, and these innovations, think about how they can apply to optimizing your knowledge workers to make sure that they're able to focus on generating insights while you have sort of a separate skill set of people manipulating the data and automating the transformations that those knowledge workers create to create sort of an efficient overall environment. So let's get into the details on the next slide. So one thing I wanted to mention is there were a lot of announcements, and as always happens, some of the announcements are for things that are available now, and some of the announcements are for things that are either available in preview now or will be available in preview soon. And preview is just a way of, it's sort of a limited release. You can contact AWS and say, I would like to sign up for this, and they give you access to it. And it's, probably still in development and probably has some rough edges, but it lets you sort of see what it is, what it's like, see if it's suitable for you. And then, when it does come into more general availability, you've got a head start, you know what it is, and you've already decided to get going with it. So I will talk about as we go through these things, which things are in preview and which are in general availability. But it's also noted on the slide. So if I forget, you can look on the slide. So the first thing that I want to talk about is AWS Data Zone, which is a entirely new service, which is going to be coming in early 2023 in preview. They talked about it a lot at reInvent. And this is a business-focused data catalog. This is a big step in promoting sort of a holistic analytic environment within AWS, because it's what lets business users find data that you've created and published and made available within AWS. The Glue data catalog has existed for a long time, but that's really more of a developer-focused catalog in terms of sort of finding tables and fields and stuff. And this data zone, on the other hand, lets you specify sort of what metadata is attached to all of the data that you want to share. You can create a business glossary. It lets you create sort of publish and subscribe relationships. So some organizations can publish data and there's an approval process, and then people can subscribe to that data. And again, there can be an approval process. And they can, when they subscribe to that data, it can be auto-shared, and some of that is using features that have been recently announced from Glue and from Redshift, even if the two organizations are in different AWS regions. So if I have data in Redshift in the US and someone subscribes to it in Europe, they can get access to that data via Redshift data sharing. So this is really important, and it's something we're going to be focusing on a lot, between now and the time that it goes into preview and goes live, because having a centralized place where you describe your data is critical to allowing people to create good analytics. They have to understand what data they can see in order to work with it. So the next thing that was announced is Spark for Athena. So Spark is a very popular open source way for manipulating data. It's been around for a while. It's more sort of code programmatic in nature, and it complements SQL very nicely. There are things that SQL is really good at, and there are things that SQL is not so good at. And plus, there are people who like using SQL and people who like using code. So Spark for Athena lets you run Spark using the sort of Athena engine and interface. And most importantly, that means that you don't really have to do any setup. If you want to use Spark in AWS, there's a lot of configuration, and you create nodes and fire them up and all that stuff. Athena takes care of all that for you. So you can just create a workbook or a notebook, put some Spark or Python in it, and then when you run it, Athena creates the necessary infrastructure, runs it, gives you the result, and then shuts it down. So you're paying by the minute. Unlike SQL Athena, where you pay by the data scanned, what they decided to do is have it go by the minute, and that just, I think, makes more sense with the way that Spark executes. But this is really great for people doing data discovery, feature engineering, basically, sort of playing with data to see what they can get out of it, because it gives you a centralized place where you can look at your data and use multiple types of tools to manipulate it without leaving the AWS ecosystem and environment. So this is something that I think people are going to get a lot of use out of. It's going to be very popular. It's definitely a very big development. The next announcement is around Glue, and there's a whole bunch of detailed announcements around Glue. These are the highlights. There are other things that we didn't put in here because, as Tim said, reInvent is massive, and there's a lot of things going on. So on a very sort of meat and potatoes level, they upgraded the versions of Python and Spark that Glue supports. This does, if you have Glue now, that requires an upgrade, because if you upgrade your Python version, there are potential compatibility issues. So you want to be aware of that. But if you're not using Glue, you can now use far more recent versions of those products. It's got support for Pandas, which is a Python package for data manipulation that a lot of people use. So being able to do that within Glue is going to help in terms of there's a much larger set of people with that skill set who can do it. Probably people who are working on Glue now already know Pandas and will be excited to be able to use it. And then they've also expanded the Glue catalog and crawler to Snowflake. So Glue can go into Snowflake and see what's there and add that to the Glue data catalog. And this is a theme we've seen there's a lot of things that expand the Glue catalog integration. And this is really important because this cascades up to things like Data Zone. Data Zone is one of the things it does is it reads from Glue catalog. So the bigger that your Glue data catalog gets, the more stuff you can put in the business level data catalog when that service becomes available. So there's definitely a sort of a good holistic picture emerging of being able to sort of look at your data all the way from the business level down to the engineering level. The next thing I want to talk about is AppFlow. This is a service that's been out for a while, but it got some announcements at reInvent around connecting to more SaaS solutions and integrating with the Glue catalog. So AppFlow is an ETL tool that focuses on SaaS solutions inside and outside AWS. And so basically they provide a number of connectors, and if you're using a service that AppFlow has a connector for, it's very simple to bring the data from that service into your AWS environment and into your analytics. So instead of having to worry about writing, detailed ETL in Glue or Python or some other system, you can just plug it in with AppFlow and the data flows in. So that can save a whole lot of time in terms of development and integration. And then integrating that with the Glue catalog again helps with discovering and managing and governing that data. And then lastly, there were a whole bunch of announcements with Redshift. Again, there are other things that weren't on this list, these are the highlights. So they updated the query editor so that the version 2 of the query editor is just simpler to use and makes it easier to do sort of playing around new basic queries right in Redshift. And then they had a whole lot of integration announcements. They're integrating Spark, so you can run Spark jobs using Redshift. You can automatically ingest data from Aurora, their RDS relational database. That's in preview right now, but basically you don't have to write ETL. Again, if you have data in Aurora, it can just come into Redshift automatically with no code required. You can auto copy data in from S3 similarly, so you don't have to worry about writing any code, data just comes in. The Informatica data loader can bring data into Redshift. So if you're using that, you now have a way to get data into Redshift. And also you can ingest data in a streaming manner using Kafka or Kinesis. So Redshift is just getting better at getting more and more data in and becoming a more centralized location for your analytics. It's a very powerful analytic database for doing large aggregate queries. So if you have those kind of bulk queries that you want to do with your analytics, Redshift is the right place to put your data. And I apologize, I realized I missed one thing on number 3. This is a preview module for Glue, which is the data quality module. Again, this is in preview, so it's in its early stages, but this is a way to introduce data quality rules into Glue and to basically, so when you're running a job in Glue or when you can analyze data at rest and apply rules to it. And so, if certain fields have to have values or those values have to be within certain ranges, or you want to run custom SQL to evaluate to see if the fields meet those criteria, it lets you do that, and then you can take those results and do various things with it. You can have jobs fail, you can divert certain data rows if they don't meet the criteria, you can create alerts and let data stewards know that there's problems with the data. So it's a way to more easily automate and encapsulate data quality rules into Glue. And AWS has created their own language for expressing those data quality rules, which is fairly friendly to business analysts as well as coders. So it's something where they're trying to make sure that data quality isn't just a thing that has to be coded in, that getting those rules into the system is a lot simpler. And as I said, that's in preview now. It looks interesting. It's still in the early stages. It's definitely something that I think they're going to iterate on a lot, as with all of these services. As you can see from this whole presentation, AWS spends a lot of time innovating and iterating, and things change very rapidly. So that is a high-level review of what's happened in the data engineering realm. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. If we have time at the end, we're happy to answer them, or we'll reach out and contact you afterwards. I think that's all I've got. And I believe we're passing it over to Brian.
Yes, welcome. Here to talk about the artificial intelligence, machine learning, also just often abbreviated AI/ML. This is as everyone I think is aware, AI, ML, artificial intelligence, those are buzzwords that you hear everywhere. However, they are very real technologies, and they are making very real changes in the way businesses operate. And AWS has provided a lot of support for that capability. The cloud really is the best place, as those who've worked with the technology know. It's data driven. It requires a lot of storage for that data. It requires a lot of compute power for the processing. So it is a natural place for AWS to support. And there were several announcements at reInvent about some new capabilities. AWS they have multiple layers of AI ML support. There is a very low level, if you are, kind of rolling your own models at a very deep level. There is support for things like TensorFlow at a very low level. Then there is a middle level, which is SageMaker, which is an AWS service that has multiple functionalities within it. And that is where a lot of AI ML development happens. All of these ones that I'm going to go through of the recent announcements are related to SageMaker. And then there is a high level, which are specific AI ML services that are sort of dedicated to do specific things on through the AWS service that can be integrated directly without needing any AI ML knowledge. So actually, let's go to the next slide, and we will dive right into some of these new capabilities. So one of the first one is this new one, which it's remarkable to me. It's called Code Whisperer, Amazon Code Whisperer, and this is a remarkable capability, although it makes perfect sense, kind of in retrospect. This is a capability, it's a service that AWS provides that can actually write code based on the comments that a developer writes about what they want the code to do. Certainly any developer who's written code has, cut and pasted previous code and reused code and found code on the internet, not all of which are the best practices. But the point is, there's a recognition that code reuse is a real thing, and that there are a lot of steps and functions that we do when developing, in particular, AI ML projects that reuse similar things. And so what this is in fact an AI service that can provide code. You can write comments, and then it provides code that should be able to perform the functionality that you are requesting the AI to do. So this is kind of an AI, I call it AI building AI. So this is in preview. This is obviously a pretty cutting edge capability. But what it can do is provide, I think, a dramatic acceleration in productivity. Your developers can, rapidly get code that, does what it's supposed to do without having to work all the syntax issues and little bits and pieces. And because it can be trained on properly written code, it means that it's bringing those best practices in as well. So you're not just getting, some snippet of code that one of your developers cut off the internet. So I think this is a very interesting capability. I think it has the potential to really transform development, especially in the AI/ML space, where there is code reuse and what it can do for productivity, just to save time, writing common features. So this is a really fascinating and interesting capability that's now out there. It is in preview, so you do need to request to participate in the service. But I would actually encourage you to do so, because again, this is one of those ones where it's going to get better as they get more feedback. And it's a fascinating capability. Another announcement was within SageMaker, some additional ML governance tools. And these are called role manager, they're called model cards and model dashboards. Anyone who's been in the ML space in the last few years knows that ML ops, which is the conceptual equivalent of DevOps for the AI ML space, which means managing the life cycle of machine learning models and their deployment and their use and their monitoring and sort of everything around the actual productionalization of AI ML models. And that has turned out to be a very challenging space, and a lot of tooling has been developed and a lot of work has gone into kind of standardizing that, understanding where the pitfalls are, understanding where the differences are with conventional DevOps, and what kind of tooling is related to that. And these address some of those challenges. The role manager is there to provide simplified sort of access control, especially in heavily regulated industries like banking, finance, healthcare. There needs to be a lot of access control over who has access to what model, who can change what data are provided to that model. And the role manager simplifies that, makes it easier to manage that access control and give the transparency into who has access and what they can touch. Model cards are this concept of essentially tagging a model with sort of their corresponding documentation, because in one of the key differences between DevOps and MLOps is that there's not a single piece of software in MLOps. You have a model, and you can have a model that's trained on different sources of data, different versions of data, and those all need to be tested and accounted for separately. And so the model cards provide a way to track that sort of documentation as a single source of truth through that life cycle process. And then there's a model dashboard, which is again a new service. And this is also just as part of the monitoring part of MLOps, is to keep track of your models, be able to identify any kind of anomalous behavior, provide alerts, all of the functionality associated with keeping track of how a model is actually performing in production, which is a really important part of any AI ML production operation, because models drift, the data coming in changes, and the model will change in response. And so being able to be alerted on any issues will allow you to actually go in and be responsive and perhaps retrain or make any kind of adjustments as needed. So these are all in GA, and they it's all under the SageMaker umbrella, but I think that they will really improve the overall ability to execute sort of all within the SageMaker space, a complete ML ops solution. The final one I'm going to highlight here is the geospatial ML with SageMaker, and this is kind of near and dear to my heart because I spent years working with geospatial data in my career, and geospatial data is a very challenging domain of data. It does not fit well or work well with traditional databases. And so a lot of the historical legacy solutions to work with geospatial data have had to kind of either roll their own or kind of kludge their way around how to do data processing. It is also a very data intense domain, in that, especially if you're working with imagery, like satellite imagery or something like that, that is extremely data dense, and so it's a huge big data kind of problem as well. And so what they've added to SageMaker are purpose-built algorithms for doing geocoding, which is finding the location, and reverse geocoding of here's a feature, where is it? They've added pre-trained neural networks for doing cloud masking. Again, that goes back to the satellite imagery processing. and they've got enhanced visualization options within SageMaker. So this, I think, is a remarkable move into the geospatial domain for processing, which has historically been a very challenging space. It is in preview, so you need to request access. But what I think we've all seen is that geospatial data has become a much more critical part of all kinds of business verticals. We perhaps used to think of geospatial data. Well, that's something that just these companies that do satellite processing. No, now we know that mobile apps that tell you where the nearest Starbucks are, that's geospatial processing. Are you an insurance company that's calculating risk and looking at where crime happens or disasters happen? That's geospatial data. Emergency response systems that are need to be able to route ambulances or police to certain locations. All of those things now are geospatial. And so having that integrated functionality within the SageMaker ecosystem, and to enable the data scientists to make the predictions, to make those automation algorithms within the SageMaker ecosystem on geospatial data, I think will open up a lot of interesting capabilities. It will benefit a lot of verticals, and any vertical that touches geospatial data, I think, will benefit from this new capability within SageMaker. So those are the three I think big ones on SageMaker. Of course, yeah, there are other announcements that have been made, but I think those are the big ones that are potentially transformative and should be of interest. And if you work in a business that touches any of these, definitely want to talk to you about how to get those fully implemented in your industry. So I think I'm going to pass it off to Dee now.
Thanks, Brian. So I'm going to go over the three biggest announcements and releases for our QuickSight. So the biggest one, I think, is going to be around paginated reports. So it was a huge announcement, highly anticipated for myself and our customers, and a big step forward, I think. So summarize what really paginated reports is if you come from an enterprise reporting background, this is more of what you're used to. You're looking at page-based reporting, pixel perfect type reporting, tabular and crosstab formats. You're going to get the functionality that a lot of people have been asking for, like how do I get to PDF? And you can download to CSV. So very reminiscent of the kind of legacy style BI tools, the enterprise functionality. In this paginated reports, you can also move your content, if you already built some, from the dashboard to paginated reports. If you had that content there and expected that you could convert it, you can simply kind of copy it into a new tab, and that new tab will be a paginated report. You kind of have a dual version of that, dashboard and a report. So we're super excited about this. It is kind of just the beginning of paginated reports. Like, this is their first release. And we do work pretty closely with QuickSight product development. So we provide feedback for future enhancements. And we stay pretty close so that we know what's coming up and what will be available. So the customers that we have that are developing on it can understand what it is that it would be capable of in a month or 2 months or 3 months. So that's a huge announcement for us. The next big announcement is actually around QuickSight Q. To describe what that is that's natural language querying, so NLQ. So very unique for a BI tool. There are some tools that have search capability, but this one actually allows you to write a question, and then it will actually not only find content that it already exists, that's been already created, it will actually generate the content for you. So it'll create a list or a chart based on a question that you ask, and you can ask that question just plain English. So things like, what was my revenue in North America like last quarter? And it will actually go and find revenue, and it will filter it down to North America and that quarter, and will generate a chart or graph, or it will give you different visualizations so that you can see what it's like. And then you can take that, interact with it, and pin it if you'd like to. So one of the features that was announced was this automated data prep feature. This allows you, instead of having to go in and tag the content and the data that you have with topics and create synonyms, it actually uses machine learning to go in there and crawl and automatically assign that. So it makes the engine work better and with less effort, so that when you ask a question, you're more confident that it'll give you the correct result. Some of the other minor features that aren't listed here is really just the ability for QuickSight to actually now forecast. So you can forecast, I think, up to 3 measures. And then you can also ask it why. You can start asking like very, very vague questions, and it will attempt to go and find content and produce content for you to go and view. And the last kind of major announcements around APIs. So APIs for AWS are very unique in the BI space, because most BI tools, when there is an API, if there is one, it's usually an afterthought, and their functionality in the API usually lags behind, again, even if an API exists at all, right? So AWS does it a little bit differently, where they deliver APIs alongside their product releases. So immediately behind them, or sometimes at the same time. So what that means is that for the most part, what you see in a QuickSight interface or UI is pretty much what you can do or create through an API call. And this is for data sets and analyses. So again, very unique for a BI tool. We use it at Ironside in a very specialized way. Like we use the APIs to help with BI migration. So we use it to help customers go from their legacy tool in a more automated fashion to QuickSight, right? So if you are somebody who's looking at QuickSight and looking to move to QuickSight from an existing tool, the next slide that we have coming up is probably going to be pretty interesting for you. So if we can go to that one. So Ironside has this package service offering called Ascent IQ, and it's really an accelerator to help somebody who has legacy BI tools. They want to get off them, modernize, and go to QuickSight. And I'll quickly go over kind of the four phases of this, right? So the first is this content ingestion phase. So we go and crawl and gather all of the data and content that you have, and then we essentially crawl it and deconstruct it into its building blocks. Then we move into this rationalization phase. And from these building blocks, we can ascertain what is a duplicate, what is something that is just similar but not a duplicate. So if you have something like 3,000 pieces of content, we can tell you with certainty, like, you only need to bring over 800 because, 1,500 have never been used in the past 3 years. We can tell you that 500 of them are duplicates. They're different areas are exact duplicates, and 250 are similar enough that we may be able to consolidate. And so this gets us to our pruning. So we go from all of your content to a subset, and that saves a ton of money and effort in doing a migration. What we also do is we look at compatibility. So we go into those building blocks, determine the features that those building blocks go and create, and we map them to the QuickSight feature and functionality. So that means that we need to stay very close to QuickSight. So when they come out with new functionality, we go and edit our engine to kind of remap that compatibility to determine, is your content 40% compatible with QuickSight functionality or 100% compatible, right? Again, that affects this estimation. And then we can get you to a much closer and more intelligent migration estimate for doing an actual migration from a legacy tool to QuickSight. When you start doing the migration, what we also do is we provide documentation in the form of report specifications in English readable format. Think about when you do this, the amount of inaccuracy that you'll get when a developer is recoding a report. This takes and crawls through those building blocks and provides, a line by line itemized list of what exists. So if you've got things like hidden fields or conditional rendering that it's not easy to find and easily forgotten when you go do a migration, this documentation allows us to put it on paper, use it as a checklist, and allows your developer more certainty that they've got everything covered, right? And the last one is related to the API that I spoke about before. We call it semi-automated migration, but from those building blocks that we deduce from this initial content ingestion, we can now take those pump it through our engine, and then using the APIs, which are up to date with QuickSight functionality, create the content in a semi-automated way. So think about if you've got 1,000 reports, we can generate many of those reports, or maybe 50 or 60 or 70% of the content in those reports in a totally automated fashion, right? It's not going to be completely automated, and it's not an easy button. There's always a manual piece where somebody needs to review the report, confirm that what we did in the automated fashion is accurate and it makes sense, and there's maybe some formatting here and there. But what we're trying to do with this process is to take what normally is a brute force development effort and make as much of it as automated as possible. And then hopefully one day we'll get to a point where we are just reviewing things, checking the box, it goes off to QA for approval. And that is our AscentIQ process, and a really quick recap on the BI announcement that were made.
Thank you so much, Dee. Really appreciate you taking a couple minutes. Jeff and Brian as well. I think we have a couple of minutes for questions, if there's any that are out there. There is a Q&A box in your webinar, your webinar control panel.
So Tim, this is Debbie, and we have received a couple questions live as the session has been going on. I can run down them, but please, if anybody else has additional questions, please put them in the Q&A. I'm going to sort of start in reverse order just because Dee's presentation is sort of top of mind. Someone had asked Dee, how long does the rationalization process typically take?
Sure, yeah. So if you're looking to do a migration from an existing tool to another tool, we typically accomplish the rationalization in 2 to 3 weeks. So it's not very long. If you think about, I was used this example because we've done some in the past where we have taken reports in brute force fashion, and we've, if you're in a legacy BI tool environment, some of those reports that you have created may have taken you several weeks to create. And we've had developers in the past recreate several days or several weeks to recreate some of the more difficult ones. And we've had a situation where two different developers were recreating a report that we had no idea was the same. It went through our production line. It went to our QA and person, and they recognized that they saw the same report a few days ago, and we had no idea that 2 developers were building the same thing. So if we could, and that took double the effort. So the rationalization piece probably takes 2 or 3 weeks, but what it could save you in redundant time could be weeks upon weeks or hundreds of hours if you have a lot of content.
Thank you. That's great. I'm not sure if you're able to share this one, but can you share anything on the new features that are coming in 2023?
So I can't share the new features, but what I can share is that we work pretty closely with product development, and I know that they are determining the order in which they're going to tackle these new features in December and early January. And then we will let our customers know when those new features are coming out, as long as we have permission from QuickSight. I know that when if you do need new features, and please reach out to us. And so what we can do is we can upvote them in the product development's dashboard, so they have a listing of all features. They can vote them up or down based on customer feedback, the number of customers that need that. So if you do have features that you need, please reach out to us and we'll let them know.
Sounds great. And we'll be sharing an email that everybody could get in touch with us to share that information at the end on the next slide. Sort of jumping back to Jeff, your presentation on data engineering and those announcements. When is Data Zone releasing?
So I believe Data Zone is going to be in preview. I think they said in March of 2023. They did not provide a date for general availability. I'm sure it depends on how development goes and what kind of feedback they get. But you can sign up to be on the preview when it goes live now. And obviously there's a number of different videos and talks talking about it from reInvent that you can take a look at if you want to get more detail.
Terrific, and we'd be glad to share that detail with anyone. They can reach out to us. And why would I use Spark instead of SQL?
So Spark is another way of analyzing data. If you think about a lot of people use SQL to manipulate data, and it was really written as it's best at doing sort of bulk updates if you want to change, a set of records in a particular way. But sometimes you want to walk through the data one record at a time, or sometimes you have changes that are just hard to express in the way that SQL works. And so Spark is a different way of doing that kind of work. And so it lets you, it's better at doing, certain things and worse at doing other things. So it's just like having another tool in the toolbox. And sometimes it's a question of what's the right tool, and sometimes it's a question of what tool do you prefer to use.
Got it. Just a couple more questions. You talked about Amazon Glue data quality, which is a new announcement. Is this offering engineering or business focused?
Yeah, so I didn't give that one the time it deserved. They are trying to make it be focused on both. There is I talked about the data quality language that they created, which is, they said it was intended to be business analyst friendly, so that people, non-technical people, could write the data quality requirements. So there is a method where basically you can write those rules. You can even have the data quality module recommend rules for you, so you get a template of what they look like, and then you can just tweak the numbers and delete the ones you don't think are interesting. So it's very simple to get those rules created, and then you can submit them as a job to say, hey, look at my data at rest and inspect it for data quality. At the same time, you can also, using those same rules, put them in your code, and so an engineer can use that language to apply data quality to their Glue jobs as they run them. I think where it looks like there may be a gap right now is bridging that gap. So I have like a business analyst write the rules, but then have those rules automatically go into Glue code. I think that's probably something they'll be working on going forward as they innovate and develop this. So it's got both right now, but they're maybe not as well integrated as they could be.
Okay, we have one last question, and it's for you, Jeff. How does AppFlow compare to Glue?
So AppFlow is intended to be more of a prepackaged sort of, I have connectors, I want to connect to things that have been, services that exist for which connectors have been written. Whereas Glue is more of a sort of, do it yourself, write code to connect, gives you much more flexibility in terms of what you can connect to and what you can do with it. But obviously there's a little more development involved. It is also possible to custom write connectors for AppFlow, but probably that's more for the service providers unless you have a service that that's really important. But it's sort of something where if AppFlow covers data sources that you use, it's a great time saver. So you should definitely take a look at it and see if it makes sense. And if you do a lot of SaaS, you've got a lot of SaaS data providers, likely some of them are connected to by AppFlow.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, Debbie. Thanks, Dee and Brian. I just wanted to thank everyone for spending a few minutes with us this afternoon. Hopefully, some of the things we've talked about have given you some ideas about how to improve or optimize your workflow as you expand upon your AWS usage. We'd be very open to follow up with any further questions or dialogue around any of these concepts. And you should receive a note from us with how to reach back out to us. So appreciate everybody spending some time, and hope we have a strong ending to the year.